Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. We're continuing on Book 2 of the Discourses. We're wrapping up. We're in Chapter 32, the penultimate chapter. This continues from the last chapter. Last chapter ends on recommended. We're going to be looking at the modes the Romans sieged cities, right? Well, he said you couldn't trust on banished people. The last chapter was not trusting banished people. Now he's going to look at how the many modes the Romans seized towns, right? So let's go look at this. Since all the Romans turned to war, they always made it with every advantage, both as to expense and as to every other thing sought in it. In other words, they made it to an advantage, both as in terms of expense, how they waged their wars, the cost of their wars, and to every other thing sought in it, the goals that they took to their advantage, that the things that they wanted, the goals that they wanted was the benefit outweighed the cost, right? And they always waged their wars in a way that minimized the cost, or at least in a way that didn't maximize. In other words, this idea that the advantage, both in terms of how they waged their wars and how they maximize the way to fight their wars, right? And the way what they sought from it, right? From this, it arose that they guarded themselves from taking towns by siege. Didn't like taking towns by siege, for they judged the expense and inconvenience of this mode to be so great as to overcome by far the utility that could be drawn from what it acquired. In other words, the cost outweighed the benefits. Siege. Don't do siege. Siege, they would rarely do a siege. In other words, they would do so a siege, but they were forced to. Necessity drove them to do that. Because of this, they thought it would be better and more useful to subjugate towns by every other mode than by besieging them. Hence, in so many wars and in so many years, there are very few examples of sieges made by them. The modes, then, by which they acquired cities were either by storm or by surrender. So not siege, storm or by surrender. Storming was either by force and open violence, by which force mixed with fraud. In other words, it was either done by force with open violence or by fraud. Violence mixed with fraud, right? Enforcement. Open violence was either by assault without knocking down the walls, which they called attacking the city with a crown, right? In Latin, right? These in Latin. For they surrounded the city with the whole of the army and engaged in combat with all sides, and they often succeeded in taking even a very big city in one assault, as when Scorpio took New Carthage in Spain. Again, Livy 26, 42 to 46. Or, if this assault was not enough, they addressed it themselves into breaking the walls with rams and with others of their war machines. Or they made a mine and entered the city through it, by which mode they took the city of the Vietnamese. Livy 5:19. Or to be equal to those who defended the walls, they made towers of wood or made barricades of earth leading on the walls from outside so as to reach their heights on these. Against these assaults, whoever defended in the first case, that of being assaulted all around, bore more immediate danger and had more doubtful remedies. In other words, they were attacked by all around, they couldn't do it. For he needed to have very many defenders in every place. And either those that he had, or not so many, that they could either cope with everywhere or reinforce one another. Or if they could, they were not all equal of spirit to resist. And though one part that yielded in the fighting, and through one part that yielded in fighting, they all lost. In other words, by attacking all around and constantly by either the walls or that, they had to always, everything had to be strengthened, because at any point that gave in, everything would be lost, right? Therefore it occurred, as I have said, that this mode had a happy outcome, attacking all sides. But if it did not succeed at first, they did not retain it much because it was, in other words, and when it did not succeed at first, they did not retain it because it was a dangerous mode for the army. In other words, if it did not succeed at first, they did not retain it much because it was a dangerous mode, right? For it extended itself over so much space that it was left too weak everywhere to be able to resist the sortie that those inside might make. So, the soldiers disordered and tired themselves. But once the unexpectedly, they would try such a move. So this was in other words, if it didn't work, they did this, dangerous, because what happens if someone decides to go attack? You're not necessarily able to. You're tired and you're. As to breaking the walls, it was opposed, as in the present times, with embankments. In other words, it was embankments that could be opposed by this. To resist mines, they made a countermine, and through it opposed the enemy. Either with arms or with other devices, among which were filled with barrels with feathers that they set fire to and once inflamed, put in the mine, and with smoke and stench impeded the enemy's entry. In other words, these assaults, the circling going through the towers and that, and even the mine, the walls could be, in other words, they're counters. In other words, and then here even the tunnels, there was countermines. They could countermine and then put men, or like the example, send something like smoke down there, right? Feathered, feel better, and set a fire, and once inflamed, put in the mine in which smoke and stench impaled the enemies. And if they assaulted them with towers, they devised how to ruin them with fire. And as to embankments of earth, they broke all the walls at the lower part where the embankments leaned, and drew inside the earth that those outside piled up there, so that with the earth being pulled there now from outside and removed from inside, the embankments did not grow, right? These modes of storming cannot be tried at length, but one needs either to leave the field or seek to win the war by other modes, as Scipio did when, having entered into Africa and having assaulted Utica and not succeeded in taking it, he left the field and sought to break the Carthaginian armies. Livy 21, 20, 29 and 30. 29, 34 to 35, and then 38, right? 30 and 8, chapter 8, line 8. Or truly to turn to siege, as they did in Vini, Caputa, Carthage, Jerusalem, and other towns they seized by sages. Now, notice this. Rare, but he mentions them right there. He mentions one is that they would try it, but there's risks to all these things, And if it doesn't succeed, you just, not going to keep on doing it. So if there's like that and it fails, stop. Do something else. Go fight them elsewhere to get, break their, don't just keep on sieging. But then he does what? He then decides to siege. Venetia, Caputa, Carthage, Jerusalem, and similar towns, they sieged by sieges. So he gives examples of those they do acquire by sieges, but they're few. As to acquiring towns by furtive violence, as happens in Panopolis, when the Romans seized it through a treaty with those inside, right? Again, 5, Livy 8, 25 to 26. Many stormings of this sort have been tried by the Romans and by others, and few have succeeded. So therefore, many stormings of this sort by furtive violence. So he gives one example of it does. Many have tried, but they have not succeeded. The reason is that every least imprudent impediment breaks the plan, and impediments, in other words, every least impediment breaks the plan, and impediments come about easily. In other words, some kind of specific furtive violence. Attempting to avoid notice or hidden violence, some kind of secret guile, some secret violence of guile. But this, any little thing, this only happens, seems to be once, right? And by a treaty inside. But therefore, this, any impediment, the least impediment breaks the plan, and impediments come easily. For now, of course, 6 is Machiavelli's either is followed in the next sentence with but or not or. So it's either but. For either the conspirators, the conspiracy is uncovered before one gets to the act, and it is uncovered without much difficulty, partly because the faithlessness of those to whom it is communicated, and partly because of the difficulty of putting it into practice, since one has to meet with enemies and with those with whom you are not permitted to speak unless under some color, right? But if conspiracy is not uncovered, in managing it, 1,000 difficulties emerge later in the act. So even if the conspiracy is not uncovered in the managing of the conspiracy, thousands of difficulties emerge later in the act. For if you come before the planned time, or if you come afterwards, everything is spoiled. If a fortuitive noise is raised by a geese of the capital, or by a custom order is broken, even the least error, every least mistake that is made ruins the enterprise. In other words, small things made in the action doing of it will ruin the enterprise. So even if if it is not uncovered in the management of the plan, then when you execute the plan, any little thing can stop it or make it go wrong, fail. Adding to this, the darkness of the night, which puts more fear into those, fear in whoever labors in those dangerous things. So there was nighttime darkness. And since the greater part of men who are led but to similar enterprises are inexpert in the sight of the country and the places they are brought, they become confused, cowardly, and embroiled from every least and fortuitous accident. And every false imagination is able to make them turn about. In other words, because they don't know anything, because the people who are going to be executing the plan are not locals. They don't know, and because of this, they're going to be confused. Where they don't know, they're not familiar. They're going to they're going to be kind of he says they're inexpert about the sites of the places and things. And they become confused and cowardly, and the places that they're brought, and the places that are brought, they become confused, cowardly, and embroiled from even the least and fortuitous accident. They become every little accident that happens. They are brought. They become confused and cowardly, and embroiled from even least from every least and fortuitous accident, every least accident, some fortunate accident, and every false imagination is able to make them turn about. And they're going to go back. Then, no, we can't do it. Nor was anyone ever found who was more happy in these fraudulent and nocturnal expeditions than Aratus of Sion. Plutarch's Aratus 7:10 to 17, who was worthy in these as he was pusillanimous in daylight and open struggle. In other words, he was small-souled and he preferred doing it fight. This can be judged to have been rather from a hidden virtue in him than because there should naturally have been more happiness in these. Right? Some hidden virtue, not just. Thus, of these modes, very many are put into practice, but few are brought to proof, and very few succeed. So, this idea that you're going to do it through some secret plan or something. So, attacking the city in all directions and ramming it and tunneling, these a little risky. You do it like this, and it's not necessarily a good idea. Conspiracy doesn't really work either. As to acquiring towns by surrender, they give themselves either willingly or forcefully. The will arises either from some extrinsic necessity that constrains them to take refuge in you, as Caputa did, right? They surrender. They'll give in. They'll give in because they're forced to. They'll take refuge in you, as Caputa did with the Romans. Or from the desire to be well governed. They'd rather have you govern them than their government. Or when they're attracted by the good government that prince holds over those who willingly consign themselves into his lap, as did the Rhodesians, the Milesians, and the other cities who gave themselves to Roman people. So they willingly do it out of advantage, to be governed badly. They prefer the better government. As for surrender, either such forces arise from a long siege, as says above, or it arises from a continual crushing by raids, deprivations, and other ill treatments, wishing to escape from which a city surrenders. In other words, either a siege, which we should, but then what? Either by what? Attacks, continual raids, deprivations, and other ill treatments. Of all the said modes, the Romans used the last more than any. For more than than 450 years, they paid attention to tiring out their neighbors with defeats and raids, and gaining reputation over them by means of accords, as having discoursed elsewhere. Right? This is again. This is Discourse 2, 1, 4, 1 and 4 and 6. Right? Discourse. In other words, you're gonna, you raid them many times, you get them tired, you get advantage, agreement, advantage, agreement. In other words, they get tired. In other words, they tire the neighbors out with defeats and raids to gain reputation over them by means of accord. As on such a mode, they always found themselves, although they tried them all. On such a mode, they always founded themselves, although they tried them all. But in the others, they founded things that were either dangerous and useless. But in the others, they found things that were either dangerous or useless. In other words, there's dangers to them and useless to them. For the siege, there are length and expense. So these are the negatives. These are the dangers and things. In storming, doubt and danger. In conspiracies, uncertainty. They saw that with any defeat of an enemy army, they acquired a kingdom in a day. And in taking an absolute city by siege, they consume many years. In other words, they can defeat the army outright. They acquire a kingdom in a day. But by taking an obstinate city by siege, this took years, and this was not advantageous. So again, the cost and benefit, the question of cost and benefit. And then what strategy you do? You try something or you take a chance on it, but then you don't commit yourself totally. Because everything has costs. Every action choice have costs. So again, even these other options, sieging was kind of like, okay, do it, but you have to. When all other options, you need this place. It's necessity forces you to do this. And if you don't do, and it's therefore worth the cost, ultimately, at the end of the day. Otherwise, you don't do that. Storming, well, there's the three ways, and each way had negatives. In other words, they had dangers. They had, what he says, doubts and dangers, that things that couldn't work. They had strategies that could counter them, and if you did a certain way, they could were an offensive. You were weak and not able to defend yourself, right? Conspiracies, anything that can undo it. And sieges, length and time. A length of time to do it, and the expense of doing it. So therefore, this is how he ends this chapter. Okay, we're going to end here. Any comments or questions, please put your comments and questions there, and I'll respond to them when I see them. If you've liked the chapter, like we've done here, hit the like button. If you've not liked it, of course, you can thumbs down it, but say why in the comments so people can benefit, and what people can benefit or learn from it in that sense. Another thing you can do is, if you've liked it, share it on your friends, share it to your friends, share it on your social media, share it far and wide. And if you've not subscribed, encourage your friends to first subscribe yourself, then encourage your friends to come over and check the channel out, and encourage them to subscribe. Help grow the channel some. Again, doing all these things, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, all of these actions add to the algorithm and help people when they're searching on this thing come to see it. The algorithm will move this up in a certain sense of the way. As you know, someone says Bitcoin or something like that. I was someone telling me I should say like Bitcoin and real estate and things like this, and the algorithm would heat it up. If those who want to follow me on social media, you can follow my social media links below. If you want to know more about me as a scholar and as an academic and check out my scholarship, you can do so. Check out the academic social media links below the social media links. If you want to help me do what I do, and you want to help me do it financially in that sense, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar. The links are below. And another thing you can do is, if you want to, or you can, another way you can help is to buy one of my books. Of course, if your bookstore has a copy, go buy it there. But if you it doesn't have it and they won't order things for you, you can go to your online distributors like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Book Depository, and order the book that way. And that's how you can do it. Or you can go to the publishers themselves. Well, then next time we meet, we wrap up book 2. So take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.